The morning Nathan Cole drove to the garage his ex-wife had left him, he had $63 in his checking account and nowhere to sleep that night. He parked on the street and sat in the car for a minute before he could make himself get out. The garage was on a lot his late father had owned on the edge of town, never sold, never developed, never anything except the place where his father had spent his evenings and weekends for 30 years doing work that nobody in the family had ever fully understood. When the divorce was finalized, his ex-wife's attorney had allowed Nathan to keep it because, in their assessment, it was worth approximately nothing. The assessment was not wrong based on what was visible. The roll-up door was seized. One of the side windows was broken, covered with plywood someone had nailed up years ago. The exterior block walls had cracks that were not new. The property itself, 6,000 square feet of land in a neighborhood the city had classified as a secondary development zone, had an assessed value of $41,000, which his ex-wife's attorney had apparently decided was not worth fighting over compared to the house, the investment accounts, and the business Nathan had spent 9 years building. She had taken all of that. She had left him the garage. What she did not know, what nobody knew, including Nathan, was what his father had left inside it. And what was inside it was going to be worth more, 1 year later, than everything she had taken combined. The question is what was in there, and the answer is going to change how you think about what gets left behind. Like this video right now. Those likes matter so much more than you think, and this story is worth it. Hit the button. Subscribe if you haven't, completely free. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Nathan Cole was 38 years old and had spent most of his adult life building something that looked, from the outside, like success. He had started a home renovation company at 29 with $12,000, and a truck he had bought from a friend for $3,000 of it. He was good with his hands in the way that certain people are good with their hands. Not just skilled, but intuitive, able to see a space and understand how it should work before he touched it. The company had grown steadily for 9 years. At its peak, it employed 22 people and had contracts with 2 regional housing developers. He had married Vanessa at 32. Vanessa was sharp and organized and had handled the company's finances for 4 of those 9 years, which was an arrangement that had made practical sense and which Nathan had trusted without fully auditing, because trusting the people close to you is reasonable until it isn't. The divorce had revealed things Nathan had not known. Not criminal things, nothing that rose to fraud in the specific legal sense, though his attorney had looked at the financials carefully and made a face that communicated significant concern. But the company's equity had been structured through a series of amendments over 3 years in a way that gave Vanessa majority control. She had moved her new relationship with her business attorney, a man named Craig, from professional to personal somewhere around year 2 of those amendments. By the time Nathan's attorney understood the full picture, the settlement terms had already been framed by people who had planned more carefully than he had. The house went to Vanessa. The investment accounts were split in a way that left Nathan with approximately the amount he had started with 9 years ago. The company, his company, the one he had built from a truck and $12,000, went to Vanessa because the majority equity said so. Nathan did not fight this as hard as he might have, partly because his attorney had warned him the fight would be expensive and uncertain, partly because he was genuinely tired in the way that people become tired when they have discovered that the world they believed they were living in was a different world than the one that actually existed. He signed the settlement on a Thursday. He moved out the following Saturday. He had no place to be. He drove to the garage. His father, Walter Cole, had died 4 years earlier at 68. Walter had been a mechanical engineer by training and an inventor by disposition, the specific kind of engineer who was more interested in making new things than in the systems that already existed. He had worked for 30 years at a manufacturing company in Michigan, done useful work there, received modest recognition, retired at 62 with a pension and a mind that had not slowed down even slightly. He had spent those last 6 years in the garage. Nathan had visited his father there periodically. He had seen the workbenches, the tools, the projects in various states of completion, the notebooks stacked on the shelf above the secondary workstation. He had asked his father more than once what he was working on. His father had always said, "A few things." It was not that Walter was secretive. He was private in the way of people who are deep inside a problem and know that explaining it to someone who doesn't share the context will produce a conversation that costs them time without yielding anything useful. After Walter died, Nathan had gone to the garage once. He had stood in the doorway, looked at everything his father had left behind, and felt the grief of it, the specific grief of a workbench where the project is still out, where the tools are still positioned, where someone's attention is frozen in an unfinished moment. He had closed the door. He had not gone back until now. Vanessa, for the record, was not a simple villain. She was a person who had decided that what she wanted was different from what she had, and who had moved toward what she wanted with precision that had not adequately accounted for the humans involved. She was 40 years old, professionally capable, and had found in Craig something she believed was a better match for the life she was building. Craig was 52 and owned a law firm that had been profitable for 20 years through a combination of genuine legal skill and a willingness to push procedural limits in ways that were technically permissible and ethically adjacent. They had begun building their shared life on the assets that the settlement had produced. What neither of them had considered in the architecture of that settlement was the garage. Nathan spent the first 2 days in the garage not working, just clearing enough space to exist, moving debris, opening the side window for air, getting the roll-up door operational with a pry bar and a can of penetrating oil and 2 hours of patient work. He was sleeping on an air mattress he had bought for $40 at a discount store. He was eating food that cost as little as possible. He was also, for the first time in 9 years, completely alone with his own time and no obligations directing it. On the third day, he started on the back section of the garage, the area where his father had worked, which was separated from the front storage area by a heavy curtain his father had installed for reasons Nathan had never asked about. Behind the curtain was his father's world, organized in the way of someone who had thought carefully about organization as a precondition for productive work. Tools hung on pegboards, each outlined in marker so the absence of any single one was immediately visible. Parts bins labeled by category in his father's small, precise handwriting. Notebooks arranged by date on the shelf, 22 of them spanning the 6 years his father had spent here after retirement, and the projects. 3 of them in various states of completion, covered with canvas tarps that had been carefully tied down. Nathan uncovered the first one, a mechanical sorting system for small agricultural components, the kind used in grain processing. He recognized enough of the engineering to understand what it was for. He recovered the second, a modified filtration unit of some kind. More complex than the first, he couldn't immediately understand the specific application. He uncovered the third. He stood in front of it for a long time. It was approximately the size of a large home appliance, the footprint of a washer-dryer unit, roughly that height. Its exterior was raw, no casing, just the working components exposed, wired to a control panel that his father had clearly built himself with toggle switches labeled in the same small handwriting as everything else in the room. The label on the primary toggle said, "Atmospheric Condensation Extraction, Prototype 3. Nathan stared at the label. He had an engineering background from his early career. Not deep, not specialized, but enough to understand what the phrase meant as a concept. Atmospheric condensation extraction, pulling water from the air. He looked at the device. He looked at the notebooks on the shelf. He pulled the most recent 3 and sat on a stool and read. His father had spent 2 years developing a portable atmospheric water generation system designed specifically for deployment in environments without reliable water infrastructure. The concept wasn't new. Atmospheric water generators existed commercially. What was different about Walter's approach was the energy efficiency architecture he had developed, which reduced the power requirement significantly below existing commercial units of comparable output. Nathan read for 3 hours. Then he called the only person he thought might be able to tell him whether what he was reading was as significant as it appeared. His college roommate, Marcus Webb, had gone the opposite direction from Nathan after school, into technology, into Silicon Valley, into the specific ecosystem of people who spent their careers evaluating whether ideas were worth money. Marcus was now 41 and worked as an independent technical advisor to a venture fund in San Francisco. Nathan called him at 10 at night. He described what he had found. Marcus asked him to take photographs of the notebooks and send them. Nathan sent 47 photographs. Marcus was quiet for 20 minutes after that. Then he called back. "Nathan," he said. "Yeah. The energy efficiency ratio your father documented, if this is accurate, and if the prototype actually achieves it, this is about 3 times more efficient than the best commercial atmospheric water generation technology currently on the market." Nathan sat on the stool in his father's workspace. "He was working on this for 2 years," Nathan said. "I know." Marcus Nakast, "I can see it in the notebooks. He was being rigorous. He was testing iteratively. This isn't a sketch. This is developed engineering." A pause. "Nathan, this could be genuinely significant." "What does that mean practically?" Nathan said. "It means you need to find out if the prototype actually works," Marcus said. "And if it does, you need to get in front of the right people very quickly, because the water infrastructure problem it addresses is one of the most funded spaces in climate tech right now." Nathan looked at the prototype. "It's been sitting in a garage for 4 years," he said. "I know," Marcus said. "I need you to find out if it still works. Like this video right now. If you can see where this is heading, that like button deserves to be hit immediately. Do it. Subscribe if you haven't. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from right now? Now watch what happens when Nathan turns it on." Nathan spent 3 weeks before he tried it. Not because he was afraid it wouldn't work, because he understood, from reading his father's notebooks, that there were specific calibration conditions required, that the prototype had been tested at a particular humidity level, and that running it incorrectly could damage components he did not know how to replace. He read every notebook. He mapped the circuit diagrams. He sourced the components that had degraded over 4 years, 3 capacitors and a sensor array that had to be ordered from an electronics supplier in Texas. Marcus called twice a week. On a Sunday morning in late October, Nathan had everything in place. He connected the power supply specified. He checked the calibration settings against the notebook. He opened the side door of the garage to establish the airflow conditions the prototype required. He stood in front of it. He flipped the primary toggle. The unit hummed, a low, steady sound that climbed slightly in frequency for about 30 seconds, and then settled. The control panel indicators moved. His father had built analog gauges into the panel, the kind that gave continuous readings rather than digital snapshots. Nathan watched the gauges. After 4 minutes, water began collecting in the reservoir his father had built into the base unit. Not a drip, a steady flow. Nathan crouched down and watched the collection rate. He held a graduated cylinder that he had bought for exactly this purpose and timed the collection for 5 minutes. He did the math. He sat down on the floor of the garage. His father's notebooks had documented a target output rate under standard conditions. The prototype, running in an October garage in the Midwest, was producing output that matched those documented targets within 7%. After 4 years, dormant, in a garage with a broken window and a seized roll-up door. Nathan called Marcus. He said 3 words, "It still works." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Nathan, I need to come there." Marcus flew in the following Thursday. He brought a mechanical engineer named Dr. Lisa Tran, who had spent 15 years in clean technology development, and who, when asked by Marcus if she would look at something potentially interesting, had agreed with the professional skepticism of someone who had been presented with many potentially interesting things that were not. Dr. Tran spent 4 hours with the prototype and the notebooks. She emerged from the garage and stood in the driveway and said to Marcus, "This man was ahead of what the commercial sector is currently doing by approximately 3 to 4 years." Marcus looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at his father's garage. "He just never told anyone," Nathan said. "We need to tell people. Marcus said, quickly and carefully, and with the IP properly protected first. The patent application was filed within 3 weeks through a specialist in clean technology intellectual property that Marcus connected Nathan with. The application was filed in Walter Cole's name, with Nathan as the estate administrator and sole heir, which he was, having been the only beneficiary of his father's will. Marcus reached out to his network. The first response came from a climate technology fund based in Boston, whose managing partner had been looking for exactly the type of solution the Cole prototype represented for 2 years. She flew out to see the demonstration. She brought 2 colleagues. They watched the unit run for 3 hours. The managing partner said to Nathan afterward, "What do you want this to become?" Nathan said, "A company, a real one, built on what my father started," she said. "What do you need?" he told her. The initial funding round closed 60 days later. Not $1 billion, not a headline number. A Series A of $4.2 million that gave Nathan the resources to move the prototype to the next stage, hire an engineering team, and begin the process of developing a production-ready version of his father's design. Nathan registered the company under the name Cole Atmospheric Systems. He filed the business address as the garage on the lot. His ex-wife attorney had decided was not worth fighting over. He did not move the company out of the garage during that first year, not because he couldn't, because the garage was where it had started, and he intended to stay in that starting place until he had built something his father would have recognized as real. He brought in Marcus as chief business officer. He hired Dr. Tran as head of engineering. He added 4 engineers and 2 business operations staff. They worked in shifts, using the garage and the adjacent lot that Nathan had quietly acquired through a straightforward land purchase funded from the first tranche of the Series A. The work was not glamorous. It was technical, repetitive, expensive, and often discouraging in the specific way that developing a product from a prototype discourages you, every solved problem revealing 3 new ones, every timeline proving optimistic against reality. But by month 9, they had a pre-production unit that performed within 5% of the prototype's efficiency specifications. By month 11, they had their first purchase order, not a small one. A contract with an international humanitarian organization for 40 units to be deployed in water-stressed communities across 3 countries. The contract value was enough to fund the next 6 months of operations independently of the investor capital. Marcus sent Nathan a message the afternoon the contract was signed. It said only, "Your dad knew what he was building." Nathan read it at the workbench in the garage. He did not reply immediately. He sat with it for a while. What had happened to Vanessa in the same 12 months was not something Nathan tracked deliberately. He heard things through peripheral connections, the way you hear things in a mid-sized city where social networks overlap. Craig's law firm had lost 2 major clients to a conflict of interest disclosure that emerged from an unrelated case 6 months after the divorce. The financial pressure on the firm had produced decisions that produced further problems. By the end of the year, the firm's reputation had sustained damage that was not repairable in the short term. The renovation company Nathan had built, the one Vanessa had acquired through the settlement, had struggled without Nathan's operational knowledge and without the client relationships that had followed Nathan rather than the company name. 3 of the major contracts had not renewed. The company had reduced its workforce significantly. None of this satisfied Nathan in the way that revenge satisfaction is supposed to work. He had thought about this, sat with it consciously, the way his therapist had asked him to. What he found honestly was that Vanessa's difficulties produced in him something closer to sadness than to triumph. Not because he missed her. Because he understood the building permit for the permanent Cole Atmospheric Systems facility was filed on the first anniversary of the day Nathan had driven to the garage with $63 in his account. The facility was designed to incorporate the original garage structure, not demolish it, integrate it. The architects had proposed beginning fresh on the lot. Nathan had asked them to keep the original building as the center of the new structure, a hub around which everything else grew. The architects had found this interesting and had made it work. On the day the groundbreaking was announced, a small, functional announcement, not a ceremony, just a notification to the city records office, and a press release Marcus sent to the regional business publication that had run a story about Cole Atmospheric Systems 3 months earlier. Nathan went to the garage alone. He sat on the stool his father had used. He took the most recent of his father's notebooks off the shelf and opened it to the last page Walter had written on. His father's final entry in the notebook was dated 8 days before he died. It was technical, a note about the efficiency calibration he had been trying to optimize. Numbers, a hypothesis, a planned, next, test. The entry ended mid-sentence, the way working notes end when you're going to come back to it, and then you don't. Nathan sat with the unfinished sentence. He took out a pen. He completed it. Not the technical content. He didn't know what his father had been going to write. He wrote underneath it, in his own handwriting, "We finished this, Dad. It took us a while, but we finished it." He put the notebook back on the shelf. He turned off the light. He walked outside. On the wall beside the garage's side door, the door through which he had first entered a year ago, a sign had been installed the previous week, waiting for this moment. Cole Atmospheric Systems, founded on this site. Below it in smaller text, "In memory of Walter Cole, engineer." Nathan stood in front of it for a moment. Then he went back to work. Vanessa's attorney had looked at that garage and decided it was worth nothing worth fighting over. He was right about what was visible. What was under the notebooks, the prototype, the 2 years of rigorous engineering work that Walter Cole had done in private because he was inside a problem and didn't need an audience for it. None of that was visible to someone who looked at the outside of the building and made a calculation. Nathan had not known either. He had gone to the garage because it was all he had. He had found what his father left him because he had nowhere else to go and no reason not to look. Here is the question. Do you think Vanessa understood what she was giving up? Or is this a story about luck, about Nathan being in the right place because he had no other place to be? And if you'd been Nathan on that first morning with $63 and a broken-down garage, would you have opened the tarps? Drop your answer. Real ones only. And tell me where you're watching from. Like this video, if Walter Cole's story and his son's story did something for you today, that like button is right there, and it costs you nothing, and it matters. Hit it. Share this with someone. Subscribe if you're not already. The next story is already coming. See you.